Welcome to Faith, Reason, and Geekdom. I'm your genuflexer, Roger. Join me as we work out these three perspectives in our culture. Now that's what I call Christian genuflexing. The Iliad. This is part one of Homer's The Iliad discussion we will be exploring in this podcast episode. What can we work out from our faith, reason, and geekdom side from the Iliad? In fact, all three of the perspectives will be hit because they are entangled throughout this entire discussion. The main points we're going to explore is what is the Iliad and why should we even care, or why do we care? Also, a brief summary of the plots point by point as we move on in the story. What are the themes and takeaways from the Iliad? This is going to be a fun discussion, very engaging. Hopefully you guys will learn something. Hopefully you guys are going to have fun digging deep into this. We could do hours and hours, many episodes and many episodes upon, but I wanted to keep it short, so just 2 podcasts, because this is, it's Homer's The Iliad. We can do entire hours, episodes of this. We could go on and on. But let's start with this. Homer's The Iliad is one of the earliest literature canon in the Western civilization. Came from oral poems. So probably during religious festivals, over many days of religious festivals, it was being told. And this was very important to pass down information, to pass down the culture, and to pass down the education, particularly young boys growing up in the Greek times. It was also used as a reference point in their culture. Then, when it was written down in Greek, most likely the 8th century BC, the last year of the Trojan War, that's what we're going to be discussing once it was finally written down. The Greeks versus the Trojans. We know the story. Helen, daughter of Zeus, wife of Menelaus, was taken by Paris, a younger brother of Hector, the greatest Trojan warriors, son of Priam. On the Greek side, Agamemnon, leader of the expedition to Troy, the battle, the siege to go on, located in the northwestern corner of what is modern-day Turkey, and accompanied by Peleus' son, Achilles, the great Greek warrior, son of the goddess Thetis, the sea goddess. The story focuses mainly on the quarrel between Achilles and Agamemnon, and the continually evenly balanced war. Remember, this is only focusing on a particular episode in the last year of the war. Many other books, some of them we do not have and did not survive antiquity, did not survive the ancient writings and passing down. It was very strenuous. Some of them are lost forever, but we do have little footnotes of them. And that's why we know a lot of the other stories surrounding the whole myth or legend of the Trojan War. Now, these epics stood the test of time. Remember, this is very difficult. You had to handwrite copies of the books. So this shows that it was actually worth it for this to survive this long. Imagine having it. They talk about carpal tunnel. People had a copy. It was very difficult process. And this should be taken to note, how this survived this long, because a lot of stuff is not. This has influence on all arts in the Western cultures. Most books from the ancient times didn't survive. For example, Sophocles wrote about 120 tragedies. We only have 7 have survived. Only 7. Think about that. The Bible, the most attested of the ancient world. The second to the Bible is the Iliad. We have hundreds of manuscripts compared to thousands of the Bible, taking this from the faith perspective, scripture. The earliest fragments we have of the Iliad is about 500 years after the fact. You compare that to a full, complete manuscript from the about around the 10th century AD of the Iliad. The Bible, written down within 100 years. So close to the time people were alive that wrote about this. John And unlike the Iliad, we have the first complete Bible by the 3rd century AD. Not to mention about an estimated 1 million quotes from the New Testaments in the writings of the church fathers between, AD 150 to 1300. Also, too, for example, the earliest copies of the works of the prominent historian Suetonius, think about that, over 800 years after the original manuscripts have even been written, not even close compared to scripture. The Iliad, also I just want to note the Iliad is not a religious text unlike the Bible, but it was very, very, very important to the Greeks. And we're going to be going through this time and time again, but I'm going to be sometimes I'm going to call to note when I'm making a point from the faith, from the reason, and from the geekdom side. But most of the time, it's all tangled. It's going to flow in and out. So I most of the time, I won't bring to attention that. But again, from the faith perspective, the Bible is extremely historic, accurate. I mean, even Bart Ehrman, in some of his writings, even attests to the accuracy. Even if there's small little differences, pretty much they estimate about 98% is so close to what it means in the Bible. So the reason I bring up that is because the Iliad is often brought up along with the Bible in comparing it when it comes to what survives from antiquity, what survives from the ancient world. So we can trust the Bible. But going back to the Iliad, it's so compared to the Bible. Very, very close comparisons people like to make of it. And so that's why I want to bring it up, and hopefully we understand that, especially as people of faith. Take a step back at that. Think about how grand and how big that is. And again, the Iliad, so influential, so important to the Greeks. Again, not holy scriptures to them, but very, very important. The Homeric question. Now, there is a debate among scholars, but most do lean towards that. This is probably made up of many short stories, short poems, and was later compiled and complete to form the Iliad. Now, there is the other side, there's one camp that says, no, that, there was a real Homer, a real Homer that had this storyline and completed it and finished it off, that this shows of design and there was a designer, Homer. Now, some people within that camp do say that, well, maybe the Iliad was composed by one person and then the Odyssey by another person, a completely different person. But that's just a small little thing within the camp of itself. But it is different from the other camp of scholars. And there's on both sides that say that Homer probably didn't exist. And again, this was just oral poems that have been compiled over time. 1795, Friedrich Wolff published many books and works on that, saying that, it was compiled from one person. And that's how the great epics that we know and we love today came about. And in the 1920s, Milton Perry had some research coming out in support of saying, well, no, there wasn't really a real Homer per se. Again, just collections of works time, through religious festivals and stories and education and all this stuff, and then compounding it later, making, the 24 standard books or 24, manuscripts. Because remember, Homer was supposedly writing these stories about 400 years after and the Trojan War. For the purposes of this episode, we're going to treat Homer as if he was a real historical person that existed. Because again, there is some on both sides. But for the purpose of that, Iliad was compiled from one guy. And that guy, Homer, awesome guy, who gave us this great work of influence on Western culture. And again, I just wanted to say that I love the epithets of Homer. I mean, so great. Swift-footed Achilles, Hector, glancing helmets. There's so many different epithets they had. Now let's get into the actual story of the Iliad. Rage, wrath. The beginning of the Iliad, so incredible. Interesting enough, in Greek, the wrath, menas, used throughout the story mainly to describe the wrath of the gods. Peleus is his dad, and he's just a human, just like us, regular guys. His mom is a sea goddess. But it's interesting that in the beginning they use wrath. They use that particular word, that Greek word that usually is designed for the gods. So immediately it kind of sets Achilles apart and lets you guys know that, hey, this is no ordinary guy. This is not just an ordinary guy. So it gets in. And also, again, this is the last year of the 10-year Trojan War. And so Homer goes into it assuming that we know about the Trojan War pre and the middle and all that stuff. He's assuming, he's going into it. We're just looking at a small episode of the entire war, really, if you think about it, mainly focusing on Achilles and the quarrel between him and Agamemnon. In the Homeric epics and the hero fighting, usually two things that they fight for is one is time, which is translated as honor. The other one is kleos, could be translated as glory. And these two things are different than our concept of honor and glory. Theirs is a little bit different. Like time is more of a tangible, it's a zero-sum game. Somebody could have more time than you. It's not an internal thing. Usually we get this, and when they sack a city, they get it in the form of slaves, women, all the kind of stuff that's given. It could be given and it could be taken away. One high form is called geros, the Greek geros. And it's kind of translated as in prize of honor. Now, this is important because in the quarrel between Agamemnon and swift-footed Achilles, he takes away Achilles' prize, his geros, prize of honor, Briseis, the slave woman. He takes her away, and one part could just be, the two dudes fighting over a woman, and there could be some type of jealousy, sexually, all that being taken away from his slave woman that he honored. It's his geros, and his time, his honor has been taken. Honor and glory is pretty much what the warrior ethic, the warrior, to quote Mandalorian, this is the way. This is what they fight for. And for Agamemnon to take that away from Achilles, one of the greatest warriors. He's like the Michael Jordan in the 90s. Okay, he is the greatest warrior the Greeks have ever seen. He is amazing. He does all of these special things that he's half a deity. But Agamemnon is the leader of the expedition. He is not the king of kings, as somebody might think or call him, because again, during this time in Homer's epic, the Greeks are not like one united front. There's kings and bunch of kings, and they're not united. It's not like one, entire Greek army and he is the king. He just happens to be the leader. So in a sense, he is kind of, for the purposes of this expedition or this fight in Troy, Achilles could be seen as kind of being under him. Huge upfront to be taking away his geros. Everyone sees this. It's very shameful for Achilles. Rage, wrath of the gods, So it's very important to know these two things. Glory and honor, time and kleos. One reason why Agamemnon does this is because his geros, his kleseis, I know that the very similar sounding words, his slave woman, also one of the daughters of the priest of the Apollo, was taken away, and he was forced to give her back. So his time, Agamemnon's time, was taken away. His honor was taken away. But again, he had to do it because of a god, because the gods pretty much told him he had to. So I know it's different, but Agamemnon is trying to get some of his teammate back because, again, kleos, glory. Now, that's what people say about you. It's like an immortality. And if you get less teammate or teammates taken away, your honor, what are people going to say about you? That's kleos, your glory. What are people going to say after you die? What's your legacy, pretty much? Both of them had to return their slave women that they had. So that's kind of gives you a background of why he would do this to Achilles, who's, again, one of the awesome, the GOAT, who he is pretty much the GOAT in this poem. Remember, two very different things. Agamemnon was pretty much forced, unless he wanted Apollo to continue throwing plague, killing his men, to return the slave woman to her father. Otherwise, he would get plague. I think that's a pretty good... I think you should return her. The only way that he's hurt from his Gyarados being taken away, his teammate being taken away, that threatens this chaos, is for him to show, hey, I'm the leader of this expedition. So for me, the only thing I can do is to take away the greatest warrior, Achilles, swift-footed Achilles, his teammate, and take away Briseis, his slave woman, even though it's very two different things. So this pisses off Achilles. So Achilles appeals to his mother Thetis, the goddesses, to appeal to Zeus to have the Trojans temporarily defeating the Greeks, so Achilles could show them how much they really need him to fight this battle, otherwise they would lose. And so petitions to his mother, who and then petitions to Zeus to temporarily grant the Trojans pretty much reign on the Achaeans, the Greeks. So this is very important, very interesting. This is a kind of battle. This kind of sets it up. This sets up everything else. Fate, that is something that we can pull from this. It's a very big thing. That's what it's about also. And we see this when, again, when Achilles decides to leave. He doesn't want to fight. He withdraws from the fight and says, I'm no longer going to fight. I'm going to take my men and I'm going to sail home. I withdraw from the fight. He wants to reestablish his importance, to get back his honor, his glory. Because in this culture, the Greek, it's a culture that's built on what other people think and say about you. That is the whole Greek warrior ethos. That's the whole Greek warrior mindset, is the time and kleos, is what do people say about you? What are they going to say about you when you die? And faith. That's why when Thetis goes to Zeus to appeal, we see faith. Because in the story, Zeus knows that Troy's going to fall. It's even the audience that Homer's getting to. We all know that, hey, it's fate that Troy will fall. It will fall. The humans on the ground, many of them don't know that, but it's fate. You can't stop it. Now, Zeus can. It kind of talks about how Zeus can change things on the way over there. He could change the paths. He could change how it happens, or certain things he can do, but he cannot change the outcome. The final outcome is Troy will fall. The Greeks will win. But that's why the goddess mother of Achilles appeals to him to temporarily do something about that. That, okay, I know Troy's going to fall, but until then, show my son's importance. Give him back his honor and glory. And that's what we see faith, that faith cannot be changed. Now, going into book 3, Homer paints the enemies of the Achaeans. That's the word for Greeks for Homer. It shows them as actually a good light. It shows them in a very sympathetic characters. For just like one example, you have, of course, obviously, Hector, who's a father, who's a loving father, a loving husband, a good older brother, a good son, the people love him in Troy. They really love Hector. He's a very, very sympathetic character. And also, don't forget, they're fighting a defensive war per se, because the Achaeans are going to their home. They're attacking their lands. Even Priam, when Helen goes to sit by them and they're observing the battles and they're having their talk, he calls her dear child. He's very, very polite, very nice to his daughter-in-law, another very sympathetic character. So it's very interesting because they're writing about their enemies. Usually they would just make them maybe seem like barbarians and these evil people that the Achaeans, the Greeks, they must fight, but they're not. They're actually, it shows a lot. It shows a lot, says a lot about Homer in the writings, And in this one, you have book 3, you have where Menelaus is going to fight Paris. They're going to do that. I don't know if you've seen a movie, Troy. I love that movie. I'm not going to really talk about that movie. Down the road in the future, I will be talking about Troy. It's one of my favorite movies. But we've seen that scene where he's fighting, and Paris, they're doing this duel, So anyway, in the Iliad, the book, they're doing this duel, and obviously Menelaus is going to win. And Paris is about to get killed. He's about to die. He's about to get stabbed. He's about to just get cut up, just beat. Aphrodite, the goddess, comes in and saves Paris. She saves Paris, swifts him away into his bedroom. And then later on, we see that she goes to Helen, and Helen is very reluctant. She's very reluctant. She's not happy. She is not happy. You've heard the saying, happy wife, happy life. Right now, she's not happy. Paris is not making her happy at all. Aphrodite's convince her and pretty much threatens her. Say, hey, you're going to go over here. Pretty much threatens her because Helen pretty much doesn't even want to be there no more. She understands that, all this fighting and war is going on pretty much because of her. And she walks around, she feels guilty. But again, she is the most beautiful woman in the world. So even the Trojans understand, and even they get it. Like, well, she is stunning and the most beautiful woman in the world. Who wouldn't fight this war for her? So even they're kind of open to her. Troy is fighting for their survival. They're fighting for their survival. And you see Hector and Andromache in one of the most famous, memorable scenes in the Iliad, where they're talking and Andromache is begging Hector not to go back and fight, to stay, not to fight. And he is there saying that I must fight because we're fighting for our survival. And he shows a very human emotion that he says, I know Troy will fall. He doesn't actually know it, even though that's true, he doesn't actually know it. But then later I think within the same sentence, he says, but I hope my son I pray that my son grows up to be a better man than me. It's a very sympathetic character. And he's talking to his wife, Andromache. What bothers him the most is not that, Troy will fall and his parents will get killed and all this other bad stuff will happen and he'll lose his life and all the other people, but that his wife would be taken into slavery, which does happen. He's being very prophetic. The Trojans and the Greeks also pray to the same gods. Some gods are on the Greek side, some gods are on the Trojan side. But it's very interesting because she knows, she's begging him not to go back and fight in battle, stay. His wife knows that Achilles has killed pretty much all of her family, and he's all that he has left, them and their son. And we know the tragic ending that happens to his family, all over pretty much an adulterous relationship with Paris and Helen, which, as in our faith as Christians, we know that adultery is bad. It's one of the 10 commandments. It's a big one. You would say it's a biggie. Yeah, it's a biggie. I would definitely say that it's a biggie. And so in our Christianity, we know that is a grave mortal sin. And we know that it leads to many destructions, and not of course, not a great war, 10-year war. I'm not saying all that, but we know that it's something that we need to turn from the temptation. If we have temptation, we must stick to our vows. And that's why, when Jesus tells us about our vows and that we're one woman, one man, that we are to submit to each other. He's given us a very, very good and very strict bond, the matrimony bond, and Helen has broken that, as so as Paris has gotten himself involved with a married woman. All of this fighting, and again, Helen doesn't even really want to be there. It's so fickle. It's such a fickle. Paris has bedded many women, and as our faith teaches us, adultery is wrong, and this all stems pretty much from adultery. It's very, very interesting how it touches on that, and it's a shame. It's a shame in his stories, in this book, in this epic poem, that the Trojans will lose everything, because we know what's going to happen. Zeus knows what's going to happen. The readers know what's going to happen, that Troy will fall. But until then, we have the journey and the drama of the humans on the ground. Now, as we continue, the battle rages on, and it's this is like Saving Private Ryan. This is like that movie. This is just epic. There's blood and gore. There's slicing and dicing. There's epic battles, people getting killed left and right. You have, if you know one of the Greek warriors who's one of the top, biggest, best warriors other than Achilles is Ajax, and he's just wrecking shop. This is an epic battle, very, very brutal too. Very brutal. People are getting stabbed through the neck, through the head. Just very brutal. The war's raging on. And as we noted earlier, Achilles has withdrawn from the fighting to make his importance known. So at this point, as the battle rages on, and it goes long, it goes really long, very action scene, big action. back and forth, you do see that the Greeks are starting to lose. They're getting pummeled. I mean, they're getting pummeled, beat to a pulp. All the battles, people are dying, people are getting killed, and people either pretty much get a little nicks, cuts, or they're dead. There's really no in between. There's really no like wounds that Homer doesn't show wounds that would get you like maybe sent home, your arm cut off. No, it's either little nicks and you're right back. You're almost like a respawning. You're right back in the fighting. Or Homer shows just brutal. You're dead. You're bleeding out. You're done. You're dead. And I think that points to death. He's showing the brutality of war. It's about death too. This don't forget. It's about faith. We talked about. It's also about death. And yes, it is about war, and it's about accepting death. It's about the human nature. What are we made for? What are we? Who are we? What are we doing? It's about jealousy. It's about honor. It's about all these things. But yes, obviously about war, spears, swords. The Greeks are losing. And, in Book 9, when Book 9 comes around, Agamemnon actually considers maybe if they should just turn around and go home because they are losing so bad and they cannot get Achilles back on. So Nestor, one of the people, the characters in the book, a very wise person. Also, you have Odysseus, who's like a master strategist. And we all know about Odysseus. So this is Nestor, and Nestor says, to Agamemnon, we got to get Achilles back. We are losing. It's not looking good for us. We got to get our best warrior. We got to get him back in play. We got to get him back on play. And Agamemnon says, fine, and he's like the Oprah. He's like the Greek Oprah. He's like, you get concubines, you get gold, you get this. And he's offering this huge list, the absolute most best rewards and honor and giving this. He's even going to give back Briseis to Achilles. He's going to give him all these golds. He's going to give him 12 of the best picked concubines from Troy once they get sacked. He says he can load his ship with as much gold. He's given in 12 cauldrons. He's giving them all this, and he's just throwing it at him, just to get Achilles back on board because they really do need him at this point in the story. So Agamemnon sends an embassy. They send Phoenix, who is Achilles' stepfather, who raised him, so they can appeal to that. He's like his stepdad. He can appeal to him raising him growing up. He's a stand-in for his father, Achilles. And Aias, who is arguably second greatest warrior next to Achilles. So he could appeal to that warrior spirit. He could appeal to that old, brothers in arms kind of, hey, we need you back on there. Come on, be back on the team. And then obviously Odysseus. He sends Odysseus because Nestor is the wisest, but Odysseus is the most clever. His rhetoric is legendary. His rhetoric is known across Greek lands, known across even farther than that for his rhetoric. Odysseus, very clever master strategist, and also the main character in the Odyssey. So you have these three, Phoenix, Aias, and Odysseus, trying to gather, going to appeal to Achilles, going to get him back on the team. It does not work because Achilles doesn't matter. He lost. He's starting to rethink the whole warrior ethos. He's trying to rethink the whole Team A and Kleos mentality of the Greek warriors. He's starting to doubt it. He doesn't want to fight for it no more. He's pretty much like done. He's done. Even he's going to get Briseis back. He's going to get all this money. He's going to get all this gold. He's going to get first the 20 picks of Troy, concubine, all the stuff that we discussed. He's going to get everything. But it's not enough. It's not enough. And these three men, even Odysseus, as great rhetoric as he has, as clever, as Phoenix as his stepdad, and Aias as a brother in arms, even they cannot corral Achilles from his rage, his wrath. Now, this is very interesting of this alliance of these group of men trying to convince Achilles to come back after they have their dinner and everything. They each make their turn. And they appeal to in different ways. Odysseus is like, if you don't care about, getting back Briseis, you don't care about the gold, the money, well, then you do it for your kleos, do it for your glory. Think about it when you kill Hector, how much glory you will have. What will people say about you? You'll be immortalized forever. He's trying to appeal to that, and he's not hearing it. His foster father, his foster father is trying to appeal to him, like, look what I've done for you, I've raised you, I've helped you, I've held you, you spit up on me, all of this stuff, and his foster father can't get through to him. And it's interesting because Achilles says something that not too many humans, or almost no humans could know, is their faith. He says that his mother, his goddess, sea goddess's mother, has told him his fate. It could either, one, he could stay and fight and die, but his kleos will be forever. He will be immortalized. He will have immense glory forever. Warriors ever, and his name will be said for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Or he could get in the ship, sail back to his home, back to his country, and he can forget Time and kleos, and he will lose all of that. He will lose that, but he will live a long, happy life. He rejects everything, so he decides to return home and just live a long life without honor and glory. And that's what he did. He rejects the warrior mindset. Everyone has a time and place to die. Everybody knows that, but they know it. They accept it. They accept if a warrior's going to die on the battlefield, they accept, hey, we're about to die. Let's get as much glory as we can. It's my time. The gods has set this fate. That's what they say. It is fate that this has happened when they die. So they accept that. And the gods are immortal. The gods in these Greek gods, they're immortal. They can't have these certain things like humans can have glory and time and courage. The gods of the Greeks, they can't because they're immortal. But humans can, so they just accept their fate of dying. Achilles has chosen to abandon that glory. But Aias actually appeals to him, gets to him. Think about all your fellow men. Think about all this stuff. So much we died, we've done for you. You fought with us. He tries to get to them, and finally, Achilles kind of throws them a bone and says, you know what? Okay, fine. You know what? I will not return home, but I will not fight in the war until the Trojans have come to him and come to their shore, come to the ships that they're staying at, come to their camps, their ships, and set them on fire. Then he will fight. In essence, a defensive war. He will only fight in defense. So he kind of throws them a bone. They ultimately fail, really. So they go back, Odysseus and them, they go back, and they tell Agamemnon, and of course he is not happy. The quarrel goes on. The fighting continues. The bloodshed continues. You see death everywhere. We know that we will die one day. And in our Christianity and our faith shows us that we must accept that. We must accept and we must move on. And later on we will talk about accepting and moving on. But this is very, very, very important. Very important to note is the acceptance. We do believe that we will be resurrected at the end of time. Body, soul, our bodies will be resurrected as our Lord Jesus Christ has been resurrected. So it's very important to have that hope. Whereas the Greeks, they have different gods, they have Hades, but very important to say, very different from, we're monotheists, and they're not. They're polytheists. So Achilles agreed only to fight a defensive battle, not fully convinced by Odysseus, his foster father, and Aias, his fellow warrior. Not fully convinced. Swift-footed Achilles. I love that epithet, by the way. That's one of my favorite ones. We talked about different characters, not all of them. Some of them we will mention in the upcoming episode. Some of them we have touched on. We might go a little bit deeper into them more. But just to kind of give a little look back before we kind of move forward, it's the characters that are in the Iliad. Most of you guys have heard of them. I think we touched on most of them. But just to go real quick through a little bit of them, you have different characters. Obviously, we know some of the big ones. Like we talked about Achilles, his friend Patroclus, who we'll mention briefly in a little bit, and then go into it more depth in the next episode. Best great friend. Of course, Agamemnon, the commander-in-chief, if you will, of the Greek forces, brother of Menelaus. Remember, like we said, that he's the one that took Briseis away. Okay, he's the one, and there's no unified king of Greek per se, but in this expedition, he is like the commander-in-chief. Also, we have Andromache, the wife of Hector, mother, Aphrodite, daughter of Zeus. We talked about her. She is the goddess of sexual passion. She's the one that kind of motivates and gives influences over Paris with the abduction of Helen, and pretty much starts off the whole Trojan War. Apollo, son of Zeus, twin brother of Artemis, kind of on the Trojan side. He inflicts plague. He has something to do with prophecy. He can be identified later on with the sun. Also, Ares, of course, son of Zeus and Hera, god of war. You guys know about Ares. If you guys ever played the game God of War, I'm sure many of you guys have. Fun game. He's associated, of course, with war. Artemis, daughter of Zeus, twin sister of Apollo, a virgin goddess. Athena, daughter of Zeus. She is the goddess of warfare. Certain noble aspects of virgin goddess associated with wisdom, cleverness. She becomes engaged in this story, entangled with, the story of Troy very much. Diomedes, he's coming in the earlier books. We didn't really mention him, but he is a great Greek warrior. He actually wounds in the story Ares and Aphrodite during one of the battles, the exchanges early on in the story. So there's no time to go into every single warrior. So some of them we cannot get in depth. There's so many. Of course, Hades, brother of Zeus, the ruler of the underwar, Hector, crown prince of Troy. Helen, of course, the daughter of Zeus, most beautiful woman in the world. And that's pretty much what set it off with her in Paris. Of course, younger brother of Hector, son of Priam, Hera, wife and sister of Zeus. Kind of a little bit of Game of Thrones going on there, but she's the patron goddess of marriage and married women. So there's that. Even though there's kind of a weird little thing going on there, but there's just so many different characters and so many of the gods, which we'll go into later. You have Menelaus, of course, brother of Agamemnon, husband of Helen, who was, taken away. Nestor, the oldest and wisest, the wisest of the Greeks. Odysseus, who comes to fame in the Odyssey. He is the cleverest and craftiest of the Greeks, a very important character in the Iliad. Of course, Paris, you have Priam. Think about all the stuff that Priam had to deal with. His sons, the lost Poseidon, brother of Zeus, god of the sea. He is very much involved in the battles, very much involved in it, in the entire thing. Of course, Zeus, the ruler of Olympus, brother and husband of Hera, brother of Hades, Poseidon, father of Aphrodite, Apollo, Ares, Artemis, many others, also half goddess too, all over. His son, actually, we'll talk about him a little bit in the upcoming as we go through in the books. So he's like the sky god, he controls thunder and lightning, patron of justice. So those are just some of the characters that we kind of refresh or go through as we continue to move on. And again, some of these characters we won't even mention. We would have to have about 6 hours to go through this Iliad story. It's very, very extensive. Patroclus, we'll talk about him, the friend of Achilles. Okay, so this poem is about what it means to be human, the reality of death, and how we accept death. This will come up very, very, very soon in the next episode. Extensively, we'll talk about that. How to accept death. Kleos is what is said about you out loud, especially in death. Especially in death. People talk about you. What do people say about you? What is your story handed down? Kleos apathe, can be translated to mean imperishable glory. You know, in other languages, there is also like a word related to imperishable glory. For example, like in Sanskrit, there is a word like that. So it kind of goes back to the Greek that kleos apathe. And that is greater than just regular kleos. This is, again, imperishable glory. So it's usually gain in death. You know, it's inflicted, how you inflict death, or both. Usually it's hand in hand, how much death you inflict and your death that you achieve the ultimate kleos apathe, imperishable glory. Now the Greeks understand that they must die, right? This is not a Christian society where they believe in a paradise and that we will live on, our bodies resurrected, and we'll have our whole soul and our body and be united in happiness. This is a little different, okay? So they understand that they're going to die, you know, they're going to be killed. So why not take kleos? Why not take as much of kleos and time as possible? Why are they on earth? Usually during battle, you know. So it's very unusual that Achilles now rejects this. Remember, that's why he rejects all of this now. So he's doing a huge rejection of the culture in that time. Now it's interesting because, you know, the gods cannot gain kleos because they can't die. You know, they're called the deathless ones. You know, humans are dead as soon as they are born, pretty much in the blink of an eye compared to the gods, Zeus, Poseidon, all of them. They are called the dying ones, the human, compared to the deathless ones, the gods. Now imagine this battle. Imagine the battle. I mean, you're sand, dirt, blood dripping into the sand, the hotness, the sweat dripping down these warriors, these Trojans fighting with the Achaeans, hair and blood getting twisted all over, the sword being thrusted into the rib cages, chomped about, chopping just meat, human meat all over the place, spears being thrusted and thrown, the fear, imagine the heartbeat of these men. And that's what we've seen in this story. It's like in all these different books, the battles that go on. Imagine the fear, blood, sweat, and fear, and spit, and just dead bodies rotting all over the ground, the dirt, the sand. Now, the gods also intervene on both sides. So while all this stuff is happening, the blood, guts, and glory, for some are on the Greeks, and some are for the Trojans, like Apollo, Aphrodite are very much helping the Trojans, and, you know, the gods are split. But ultimately, most of them go with the will of Zeus, and that's going to be his will. And you see how Zeus kind of plays both sides. We will talk more about the gods in the next episode. We touched on faith, reason, and geekdom in this episode. Drawing, all three were intertwined with just talking about the Iliad alone. The faith, talking about everything involved with that. The reason, the literary giant that the Iliad is. Geekdom, I mean, there's been comic books, there's been movies, there's been so many. I mean, the DC which is actually my favorite. I love DC and Marvel, but DC is my number one thing, especially their animated series. You guys should really check that out, especially Wonder Woman. Very into the Greek mythos, and that's one reason why I like the DC a little bit better, but love them both. But it's so much in the culture, pop culture, the Iliad, so much into that. So we touched on all three of these things. Once again, I want to thank you guys for joining me in this faith, reason, and geekdom. Christian genuflexing. That's what this is about. You guys, please get us subscribe, give a 5-star review on Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, most of the platforms. Please leave messages, email the show, look at the show notes. Thank you guys. And next time we're going to get into a lot more. And that's going to be the end of our show. Godspeed.